So let's talk a little bit about funding it. So this morning we were talking just before the break about actually how do we find some deals. And also if you've got your own money, savings in the bank, equity, obviously you can use that. But at some point most people run out of money, so you need to think about other people's money. And a lot of people who want to invest in property, they look at what they've got in the bank, or rather what they haven't got in the bank, and they think they don't have enough money to invest, okay? So we really want to kind of talk a little bit about that in this section. And this really is the biggest challenge that most investors face. And no matter how much money you have, at some point you will run out of your own deposit money. And not having funds could prevent you from finding deals, because people will think, well, I don't want to go and look for deals because if I find a really good deal, I can't actually do it because I don't have the money to do it. And so that's a real problem. Whereas if you recognize if you're finding good deals, as long as you have a good network of people you connected with, there will be people who could potentially fund those deals for you. So just be aware of that kind of that concern of, well, why look for deals if I can't find them, if I can't fund them, okay? I want to reassure you there is plenty of money available. There is plenty of money available, particularly people have money in their savings, they might have it in their business, and if it's sitting in their bank account, it's really not doing much for them. You know, I do not have a lot of spare cash sitting in my bank because it's depreciating every day. Money you have in the bank is going down in value. So don't have a lot of cash. You want to deploy that money and get it working for you rather than you having to work for money. Isn't that an interesting concept? You want money working for you instead of you working for money. And we do that by investing the funds we have. And you need to believe that there's money out there, and also you need to know how to find the money, okay? So we're going to touch a little bit on this, and we're going to come back tomorrow to talk about one of the best ways of actually finding money. But I'm going to talk a little bit about using equity from your own home, because it might be your own home, or maybe you've got another investment property, and I'm going to teach this because so to many of you, this is obvious, and many masters, you'll know this if you're on Mastermind, but I'm doing this because no one really teaches us this stuff. We certainly don't learn at home and school or college, etc. And so unless you know someone who's in property, this might be very alien to you. And it's probably the best way to get into property is releasing equity in existing property. Now, it could be your own home, it could be investment, it could be an inherited property. I remember there was a guy who, the very, very first paid event I went to was a marketing event back in 1998. And I was running my student nightclub business at the time, part-time while I was working at Cadbury's. And I'd started to learn a bit about marketing. And I realized, right, to get lots of these students into these clubs, I had to get better at marketing. So I went on this course, and it was actually in Heathrow. It's a £4,000 course for like 4 days. And I think, oh God, it's so expensive. But I went, and you know, one of the best things I ever did. And one of the guys I met on that, because you know, the network's really powerful, I met him about 10 years later. So 10 years on, I was at another event, and I was actually speaking at this event. It was an event with Brian Tracy, who's an amazing a guy from very old, he's now. But so I was at an event, he was speaking at that event, and I was speaking at that event, and this guy came up and said, oh, did you remember me? And I did, because he's quite a tall guy, and he's got a strange name, and I did remember him. And he said, oh, I'd love to get into property, but I just don't have any money. I said, okay, so tell me about the situation. He had his own home, and he was paying that down, as most people do, and he had this property he'd inherited. He said, oh, my father passed away and left me a property. And he explained to me, and whenever I got time at the weekends, I'm doing a bit of work on it to get it, because it was a deceased estate. And usually people who live in a property and then eventually die there, they might have not done any work for 20, 30 years. And often these properties need complete modernisation, new kitchens, bathrooms, decoration, everything, right? Rewiring sometimes. And this guy was saying, oh, well, I can do some of it myself, I'm spending a bit of time, and I don't really have the money to pay anyone else to do it. And I said, why don't you remortgage the inherited property? And he looked at me really blankly. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, remortgage it. He said, no, I've got a residential mortgage. I said, well, it's an investment mortgage. And you know, this is a smart guy, And he just didn't know that you could have more than one mortgage. And forgive me if this is obvious, but I'm just saying it because I don't want to assume everyone knows that. I don't want to leave people behind. You have a mortgage on your own home, residential, which is very much based on your personal income and your affordability. And then other properties, it's about the rental income from those properties. And he'd taken about 6 months. He was halfway through doing this himself. And when he had a bit of money, he'd pay a friend to come and help him out, do some of the work. And he could have, just remortgaged this property. He could have got bridging finance straight away, could have got the work done by someone else, and got it up and running, giving him cash flow, because he didn't know he could refinance that property. You don't know what you don't know, right? So I just want to share a little model. We'll go through some numbers. I'll do it on the flip chart, just so you can see just how we can do this. And a lot of people, they also worry about using equity from their own home. And the reason is we're all told that we need to pay down our own home, And by the way, that's great advice, paying off your own home as quick as you possibly can if you're only ever going to have one property. If you only have one property, i.e. your home, pay it down as quick as you can. And if you can pay it down quickly, you'll have more money in later life, great position to be in. But as investors, we recognize that home might have some equity that we can access. We can borrow that equity from our house, invest it in some other investment properties, and as they go up over time, we can remortgage those to pay off our own home. That's what I want to kind of run through and show you the numbers on, okay? Now, this is how most people start, and again, I remember I was speaking to another lady at one of the property shows I was speaking at and exhibiting. This lady came up, again, she was a scientist, really smart lady, and she said, I'd love to get into this property, but I just don't have any spare cash. And so I said, well, tell me about your situation. She lived in a house, I think it was worth about $240,000 at the time. And I said, what's your mortgage? She said, oh, no, I've not got a mortgage. What do you mean? I've paid it off. And she was about 45 at the time, scientist on a very good salary. So she had used her salary, paid her mortgage down, and she had a nice life. So she was pretty much spending what she was earning, as many people do. And she didn't realize she could release so much money from her property, which she then did. And she then came on Mastermind, and the rest is history, right? But this is how most people get going, okay? Now, when you are a homeowner and you've been conditioned to pay down your mortgage, the concept of actually increasing the debt on your own home can be quite scary, because people worry about, well, there's the extra cost of doing that, and I'm going to have to pay that back at some point. And that's absolutely right. On your own home, at some point, usually at retirement, 65, 67, 70, whatever it's going to be, the mortgage companies want you to pay your home back, because they're going to say, well, hang on a minute, how are you going to afford to pay your mortgage? Because the reality is we all need to be aware, if you're working right now, earning good money, when you stop working, the average person, their income is going to drop massively, unless they put provisions in place like property, for example, okay? So people are worried about the debt increasing, but actually there's a way you can do this, and it's not really going to cost you anything extra each month, okay? And there's a way of releasing equity in it. So I'm going to go through an example here. So I'm going to do this on the flip chart. I hope people can kind of see this and hopefully work with me on these numbers. Can we maybe put the flip chart up on the screen? Is that possible for people who are over here? I might be standing in their way. Is that possible to sort out? That'd be cool. I probably should have told you in advance about that, but if you could work that out, that would be amazing. Can we give a round of applause for all the video guys at the back, by the way? They're doing a live, simultaneous broadcast, obviously, to all the people who are on home at Zoom. They're doing mixing, and they're doing an amazing job, and I've just complicated their life a bit more. But still, anyway, never mind. Let's move on. So let's assume you've got a property, and I'm going to make some numbers up here. Let's say it's worth £400,000. That's, say, your own home. Your home might be worth more, might be less. By the way, you might not have a house at the moment. That's fine. This could be someone else's, but just let's work with the example. And let's say, like most people, you've been trying to pay down the mortgage, because that's what you were told the right thing to do is, and if you only have one house, it's a good thing to do. So let's say the mortgage is only, I don't know, $60,000 at the moment. And in 10 years' time, you could probably pay that off, right? So let's think 10 years down the line from now. This is now, and this is 10 years. So if a house is worth $400,000 now, how much could that property be worth in 10 years' time, guys? Could be 800. No guarantees that's going to happen, but it could be £800,000. And in that time, in that 10 years, could you have paid off the 60,000 mortgage? Yeah, of course you could. So maybe there's no mortgage, so it's completely unencumbered, i.e. no debt. Great place to be in. How many of you would like to be in the place in 10 years, completely paid off your own home mortgage? Who'd like to be in that position, yeah? It's a nice place to be, because you don't have to worry about it. So that's a good thing. The problem is, and when you live in this nice big house, sometimes people, they might have kids, and the kids go off to university, or they get married, or whatever, and they've got this big house, but actually, they don't need such a big house. They only kind of live in 2 or 3 of the rooms, and it costs a lot to heat it. So the problem is, you might be equity rich in retirement, but cash poor. So what most people do is they might sell the big house and downscale to a small house and release the money and live off some of that cash, or they go and live in a cheaper area. Okay, that's what people do. I don't know about you, I want to keep the big house, right? I've worked hard, I want to stay in a nice big house. So there is another way. So instead of working to pay off your own home mortgage, what you could do maybe is increase the borrowing on the property. So let's say, and I'm going to make some numbers up, let's say we go and get a mortgage of $300,000 on our own home. Now, this is based on you having enough income to be able to justify and afford this kind of mortgage, okay? And actually, at first, this might have been a repayment mortgage because you're paying it down, but if you're going to borrow money short term, you might want to change to an interest-only mortgage, which means you're just paying interest on this money. Now, be careful, because interest only means when you take the loan out now, in 10 years' time, you still owe £300,000. So you've got to have a mechanism to pay this back, which I'll explain in a moment. But suffice to say, interest only, it should be less payments per month than a repayment mortgage. But you've got a big chunk of cash you've taken out. There'll be an initial mortgage of 60, so you've got about an extra 240,000, which you can then use to go and invest in property, okay? So we'll come back to this, but let's assume you've done that, and you've got this 240. We're going to take 200 of that to use as deposits, and we're going to use 40 of it just for costs, okay? So with that 200,000, we could break it into 4 chunks of £50,000, like that. And this could be at 25% deposit, and we're going to get a 75%. I'm not going to write it because it won't fit in, but for each property, we're going to get a £150,000 mortgage. So in other words, that gives us our 100%, a £200,000 investment property, okay? So just to recap, we're taking the initial 240 out. We're taking 200 of that, breaking it into 4 chunks of 50,000. Each chunk of 50 we're using as a deposit. So we have 4 of these. We're going to have a total of £600,000 of mortgages, and we're going to have £1,000 worth of property. Okay, does everyone get that? Yeah. So what we've done, we've taken the money from our own home, and we just redistributed it amongst 4 investment properties. Now, how many people, be honest here, and it's okay if you put your hand up, how many people are slightly scared about getting an extra £600,000 of mortgages on these investment properties? Come on, be honest. Who's a bit scared about that? Okay, and you should be, yeah? If you're taking out debt, you've got to make sure you can pay it. But who's going to pay for these mortgages? Tenants. The tenants. You're not paying for it. The tenants in the properties are going to be paying these mortgages. And the idea is, remember, each property is going to make enough cash flow, so it should be making profit every single month. So not only are these properties mortgages going to be covered by the tenants, you should also make, if you do it correctly, enough money to cover the cost of this borrowing, and if you do it correctly, have extra cash flow as well. So as long as you do this in the right way, the money you're redistributing amongst the investment properties will more than cover the cost of borrowing from your own home in the first place. Give me a wave if that makes sense. You get the concept. Okay, good. So why would you go to all this hassle? Why would you do this? Well, each of these properties can give us an income, first of all, and after all the costs, we might make a profit. That's the idea. But let's think about the long term. So if we've got 4 properties at 200,000 each now, how much of those properties can be worth in 10 years? probably 400,000, right? No guarantees, but let's say they're worth 400,000 each. So if each property is worth 400,000 and we've got 4 of them, that means your investment portfolio is suddenly worth not suddenly, after 10 years, it's worth 1.6 million, okay? And remember, how much are your initial mortgages, guys? I'm making it easy for you guys. This is the participant. Now, I know what's happening right now. About half an hour ago, you were enjoying your desserts. Right now, your stomach is enjoying your desserts, okay? So those little tarts were nice, weren't they? If you're at home, you missed the desserts, I'm afraid, but still. So can we all participate, if that's okay? And if you're at home, speak to the camera, speak to your computer. So we've got 4 properties in 10 years' time worth maybe on average 400,000 each. 4 of them means 1.6 million pounds of property. Remember, we took out the 4 mortgages 10 years ago, 150 each, that's 600,000. So we've got £1 million of equity in this portfolio. Who'd be happy with that, by the way? By the way, it's only 4 properties. I've not bought 50, it's only 4. And your own home, by the way, that's gone up in value. But remember, you've still got that 300,000 mortgage here. Okay, but there's £500,000 equity in your own home as well. Okay, so that's a nice position to be in, isn't it? But remember, wrong way, sorry. At some point, you're going to have to clear the mortgage on your own home when you get to a certain retirement age. So what we could do is these investment properties, as the value's gone up and the rents will go up over time, obviously, those of us properties, how many have you found we've had a massive increase in the rent we can charge over the last couple of years? Yeah, rents have absolutely shot up, which is great. Good for us, not so good for tenants, obviously, but great for us. So what we can do is we can remortgage each of these investment properties, okay? So let's say we increase the borrowing on each of these, and instead of making the mortgages, instead of 600, let's increase the borrowing up to 225,000. I've done that for a very particular reason. So 225,000, which is less than 60% loan to value, by the way, times 4 gives us £900,000. That's enough to pay off the original mortgages of 600,000, and it gives us enough to pay back the mortgage on our own house as well. So in other words, just to be really clear, what we've done here, we've remortgaged our own home, we've taken out the equity, we've used that, we've bought 4 investment properties, and the value of those properties have gone up over time. We've then remortgaged those, increased the borrowing to take out 300,000 to clear our own home. So now you have your own home completely paid off, and you've got 4 investment properties, which still have £700,000 of equity in them, which you didn't have before, and you've got 4 properties giving you positive cash flow. Who'd be happy with that? It's not bad, okay? Now, that's just in 10 years. Now what happens, by the way, is well, yeah, what if properties don't double? What if they don't double in 10 years? Well, let's say they go up only 50% in 10 years, okay? So if they go up in 50%, they go up to maybe 300,000 each, okay? Times 4 means 1.2 million. If they only go up 50% are we being really conservative with that, yeah? Well, we only need to go up to 900,000. 900,000 is still 75% of 1.2 million. So even if properties only went up 50% in this example, we'd still be able to refinance and completely pay your house. So just don't think this is dependent on property prices have got to double in 10 years. I'm not saying that. I'm just showing you that we're using the equity from our own home, putting that as seed capital to buy some investments, and the value of that goes up. We refinance to pay back our own home. Does that make sense? Yeah? Great. Now, the other thing to think about is we've talked about these properties which in 10 years might be worth 1.6 million. We remortgage them, so the mortgage is going to be 900,000, okay? Now, looking around the room, actually got to check before I say this. But yeah, we're all looking not too bad. Hopefully we're going to hear longer than 10 years. I'm just checking, okay? So what if we hold them not 10 years, but 20 years? What could happen in 20 years' time to the value of this product? Well, could they double again? They could do. Yeah, there's no guarantee it's going to happen, but if it did, this portfolio would be worth, let's say, 3.2 million in 20 years' time, and the debt's only 900,000, which means actually we've got more like, what's that, 2.3 million pounds of equity. Is that a pretty good pension fund to have? How long would it take you to save 2.3 million pounds? It's never going to happen, is it? Well, probably not longer than that, I would have said. Most people, this is never going to do it. But we are getting property to work for us. We're getting time to work for us. Now, you might be sitting there saying, well, that's great, someone, I don't have any equity in my property. No, but you know other people who do. Maybe you have family members, maybe you have parents who might be at some point leaving something to you. There's something we talk about which is called inheritance in advance. Now, I want to really be careful here. I'm not suggesting you go home to your elderly parents to say, this weekend I saw this bloke with funny coloured hair and he said you should give me all your money and your property. I'm not saying you do that, but you should definitely be talking to your parents, elderly relatives about what you're doing. Okay, really, really important. I do hope you got massive value from watching this YouTube video. So invest with knowledge, invest with skill. I'll see you very soon.